Hello, I'm Amy and I work at Mr. B's and I'm here to tell you all about my favourites. First up, we've got the Book of Lost Things, which often I go around kind of telling everyone is my absolute favourite book of all time. I guess it still is, but I haven't reread it for a little while, so I'll have to get back to you on that one, but I do adore it. It is set around World War II, and you've got David, who is your main character, and he's struggling somewhat. So at the beginning of the novel, his mum dies, and it's basically a retelling of lots of different fairy tales mashed together. And he is really, really struggling because him and his mum used to adore kind of reading together in his attic, and he kind of comes back to them after she's died and just kind of loses himself in them. But because the war's kind of going on in the background, something happens, which I don't really want to spoil, and he ends up in a completely other world, a fairy tale world. And I've always said to people, I love the beginning of the chapter where he comes into the world because he comes out of a tree trunk, and he's sort of like, how did I get here and what on earth am I doing? But he meets the huntsman from Snow White first, and he's just like, oh, hey David, how you doing? And David's a bit like, who are you and where am I and what am I doing? And I just love his innocence throughout the whole book. It's just beautifully done because obviously he's dealing with so much grief, but he is kind of just coming into himself as well and learning all about the world. Some of the fairy tales that he comes across in the other world are really dark. So yeah, I'm not going to pretend it's all happy and wonderful. It's one of those ones that I've read quite a few times now, and it stays with you. And if you want kind of escapism with lots of heart to it, maybe with a bit more of a gritty kind of underside, then it's perfect. Okay, we might as well talk about the one that we don't have. So basically what it was going to be, the next book was going to be The Bear and the Nightingale, but we don't actually have one in the shop at the moment because everyone is buying them and they want them and they should. So I'm holding The Girl in the Tower, but I'm going to talk to you about The Bear and the Nightingale, which is the first in Catherine Arden's Winter Night trilogy. So The Bear and the Nightingale is one of those books that when I finished it, I knew it was going on my favourite shelf. I just wanted to read it so slowly because I wanted to be there. I didn't want to be anywhere else, and I think, to be honest, at this time, if anyone needs escapism and they want magic, it's just read it. It's just so perfect. So it's set in medieval Russia, and you follow Vasya, who's your main character, and she is very different from everyone else in her village. She's very feisty, and she speaks her mind a lot, and she also can see spirits that no one else can in her village, and she's outcasted a lot at the beginning, especially because a lot of the book looks at religion in the medieval period and kind of the clash against Christianity and paganism, which is really interesting. And so a young priest comes to the village really early on. He's got tunnel vision. He's set on converting them all to Christianity and, just them all believing exactly what he believes. And obviously Vasya doesn't, and she doesn't like him, and it's really interesting to see them kind of at loggerheads the whole way through. But you've also kind of got as well all the folklore and the fairy tales from Russia coming into it. So Dunya, who is the maid that looks after Vasya and her brother and sisters, she tells them stories all the time as they've grown up, and it's wonderfully woven into the story, especially when Vasya realises she's more kind of tied to the folk tales and kind of old tales than she first imagined she would be, especially when she kind of starts to realise what it means with her seeing the spirits and what's happening kind of to the rest of the world around her. Yeah, it's dark and it's wonderful, and they have, again, a lot more grit to them, and Vasya's an awesome, feisty main character, so yeah, it's brilliant, and I love it.
Let's talk about Solomé.
Oh, and Solomé, the horse. Well, no, we can't say, can we? We can't say too much about Solomé. Who is Solomé? Next one is Heap House by Edward Carey. We are all absolute huge fans of Edward's in the shop. He's done, brilliant kids ones, brilliant adult ones, but Heap House is on my favourites because I just don't think you can get a more awesome, weird protagonist as Claude. He's just absolutely wonderful. So it's set in kind of Victorian London, but kind of an alternate version of it. And so Claude, who lives with this family, the Ironmongers, and they're very wealthy, but wealthy in their own way. So they collect all the rubbish that Londoners throw away. So they live in Heap House. So basically the house lives on a pile of old rubbish, but the objects that they collect are important to them for a reason that you kind of delve into as the book gets into it. And Claude's a bit different from everyone else in his family. So he can hear the objects speaking to him. So they constantly shout out names to him all of the time. And he's bombarded by this. And he just doesn't really understand why. And he goes to his grandfather a couple of times and, you know, they kind of palm him off and say, you're just special, Claude. But he really, really wants to get to the heart of it. Especially because they all have objects that they have to carry around with them every day. And if they're parted from it, then things start to go a bit wrong, as you'll find out with some of his family members who lose their objects. So he is desperately wanting to find out what's happening. So it's definitely part mystery. It's just so wonderfully quirky. Lucy, who's your other main character, she is a young servant. She comes to the family to work quite early on, and she realises something is amiss. She feels uncomfortable, she doesn't really like it, and when she bumps into Claude late at night when she's sweeping chimneys, she realises that he is also, wants to work out what on earth his grandfather's been up to. So them as a pair are wonderful. I just love their friendship. It's sweet and it's innocent, and it's just, it'll make you laugh in places as well. It's beautifully illustrated throughout because Edward is a wonderful illustrator as well. So do check it out if you fancy something quite whimsical, but then again, it's got like a shade of a darker side to it as well. So next up, we've got The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So this was a funny one for me because I read a lot of fantasy and I read a lot of kind of magic, but I don't often reach for quite high fantasy. So when I read this one, I was absolutely just so pleasantly surprised that I loved it so much. So it is high fantasy set in an alternate version of Venice. And the setting and the world building is absolutely incredible. So you follow Locke, who is your main character, and he is a thief, basically. So the novel begins with him as a young child. He is orphaned and he has no kind of real place in the world. And he gets taken in with a man and a group of other young orphans that he teaches to pickpocket. And that's kind of where he learns his trade, and that's when he realises how good he is at it. And him and his now group of gentlemen bastards, which they call themselves, his group of very best friends, instead of just pickpocketing, they come up with elaborate scams to get all of the money from the rich people in Camor. And think kind of Robin Hood, but they don't give the money to the poor, they keep it themselves. But they are wonderful characters. I think I always go on about Jean. Jean is Locke's right-hand man. He is the one that they employ to beat everyone up and to kill everyone, but he's got like the warmest, sweetest heart in the world, and I love him. So the main kind of plot of it is the wealthiest family in Camor, they really want to take all of their money. And they've got to come up with quite an elaborate scam to do so, and you follow them doing that, but things obviously don't go right the whole time, and things start to go very, very awry. Absolutely wonderful escapism, and yeah, it's got quite a lot of bad language in it, but they're such nice characters, you can bypass. Okay, next up we got Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. And this is one that I only read 2 years ago, and I got laughed at by everyone here because they were like, late to the party, Amy. But I think it doesn't matter how, when you read something. It made such an impact on me. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. So I'm quite a fan of historical fiction, especially when it's based on a true story. And it's based on a true story of Grace Marks. She was convicted of murder in the 1800s, but she was never really trialed properly for it, so she got away with it basically, and there's kind of a lot of guessing whether she did or she didn't do it, and this is told partly from her perspective of her early life and how it led up to the murder and then what happens afterwards, but also every other kind of chapter you've got a scientist, I suppose a psychologist if you will, who's been sent to kind of analyse her and study her and basically try and get the truth from her to find out whether she did commit the murder or not. You really get into both their minds. It's quite claustrophobic in that sense, but it's beautifully written, and it leaves you at the end wondering, like, did she do it or not? And no one really ever knows, and no one's been able to prove it. The last one! Bloom! I love Bloom so much. So this is a really recent addition to my favourite shelf actually. I read it last year, and it was in our Christmas catalogue as my favourite book of the year last year because I loved it so much, and it's a book that makes you smile, and I think at the moment, if you want a lovely, cosy, wonderful hearted book about nature and you want to smile, just read this book. Nicola Skinner just writes with just such passion. You can tell she loves the environment, and you can tell she just loves the story that she's created as well. So you've got Sorrel, who is your main character, and she She lives with her mum, and she loves it. You know, she thinks they're really happy, and you kind of uncover a little bit about their relationship and her mum as the novel goes on. And actually, it's so heartwarming to see that maybe everything isn't as good as she thinks it is, and how they rectify that is really wonderful. So Sorrel is the best at everything. She tries to be so good. She goes to school. She's head girl. You know, she loves to do the right thing. She hates breaking the rules, and she's such a wonderful character. And she basically, one day when she gets home, she hears something in the garden, and she's a bit confused, and she's a bit like, I wonder what's happening. And she goes to the tree in her garden, and she digs around, and she finds some seeds in her garden, and she's just like, And on the packet it's surprising seeds, and she's like, wonder what that means. I wonder why they're in my garden and who put them there. She takes them in, and she doesn't really know what to do, but she consults her best friend who's amazing at science, and they kind of look at them together and they think, we should probably plant the seeds to see what happens. But in doing so, they accidentally plant them in the wrong place. And as you can kind of tell from the front, they don't really go in the soil, and they go onto Sorrel's and her best friend's head. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's funny, it's quirky, it's whimsical, but it's got so much kind of heart to it as well. I love it. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you like the sound of some of those. Like I said, they're all available to purchase on our website. And yeah, hope to see you guys soon. Take care.